Hi there, let's have a look at Valhalla Vintage Verb and the features and controls. Get comfortable, perhaps a cool beverage, and sit back. We will learn all about Valhalla Vintage Verb. Valhalla Vintage Verb is an emulation of some of the classic hardware reverbs from the 70s, 80s, and all the way up to today. It offers 18 different reverb algorithms. First, let me explain what some of the main parameters do. These parameters can be found on most reverbs and serve the same functions. We will not only explain parameters that are on Vintage Verb, but also standard parameters that are regularly found on both hardware reverbs and software reverbs. Type or mode. The environment the reverb is emulating, such as a concert hall, room, or plate reverb. Length or time, or on Vintage Verb this is called decay. This is how long the reverb effect lasts before it completely decays. Pre-delay. This is how it takes before the reverb starts, often used to create distance. Early reflections. On Vintage Verb, this is found under diffusion. The early reflections are the first reflections heard after the audio begins. Also under diffusion, you will see the word late. This represents the main reverb that occurs after the early reflections. The controls essentially allow you to change not just the volume, but also the relationship between the early and late reflections. Size. On Vintage Verb this is found under shape. Size represents the physical size of the acoustical space. Attack. This is how long it takes for the beginning of the reverb to evolve. Modulation. Modulation allows for modulation the decaying delays. This is something that was often done on some of the lexicon hardware reverbs. It creates a kind of lush quality also known as shimmer. The artist and producer Brian Eno was well known for using this effect as part of his ambient sound. Rate. This controls the rate of the oscillations, or modulations. Depth. This controls how deep the modulation is. Another way to explain this is how much the pitch is shifted or detuned. EQ. Vintage Verb has two control here, high cut and low cut. These filters allow for controlling the high frequencies and the low in order to change the tonality of the reverb or space. Damping. High frequency controls the top frequency of the reverb while high shelf is how much will be rolled off. Bass frequency give you control over choosing the low frequency. With the bass multiplier you can extend the lower frequencies of the reverb. Dry and wet mix. This is how much of the original audio is heard in relation to the reverberated signal. Color. This is where you choose what style of reverb unit will be emulated. The color control dials in the tone color and sonic artifacts of each specific reverb era. The 1970s color model is dark and noisy with the potential for strange and random artifacts. The 1980s is still funky, but with a brighter sound. Now is too digital, clean, and colorless. As you switch through the eras, the colors of your GUI change, too. Presets. This is where you choose the preset you want to load. You can also save presets here by clicking on Save As, naming your preset, and saving it. The modes on Vintage Verb. The mode control in Valhalla Vintage Verb is a super powerful, high-level control that allows you to switch between 18 different reverb algorithms. Concert Hall. Based on the Hall algorithms of the late 1970s and early 1980s. Huge spatial image, echo density that can be adjusted from very sparse to very dense, and lush chorusing modulation. Fairly clean tone, without converter coloration. Bright Hall. Similar to the Concert Hall algorithm, but with a brighter initial sound, and deeper and lusher modulation. Fairly clean tone, without converter coloration. Plate. Inspired by early 1980s plate algorithms. Highly diffuse, bright initial sound, high echo density, lush chorused modulation. Fairly clean tone, without converter coloration. Room. Emulates the sound of early 1980s room algorithms. Medium diffusion / early echo density, somewhat darker sound, chorused modulation. Fairly clean tone, without converter coloration. Chamber. A transparent and dense algorithm. Highly diffuse, high echo density, less coloration than plate / room algorithms, chorused modulation. Fairly clean tone, without converter coloration. Random space. This generates deep and wide reverbs, with a slow attack, and more diffusion than the late 1980s algorithms that inspired it. The modulation uses internal delay randomization, to reduce metallic artifacts without the pitch change that can occur in the algorithms with chorused modulation. Chorus space. Deep and wide reverbs, with a slow attack, and more diffusion than the late 1980s algorithms that inspired it. Similar to random space, but with the delay randomization replaced with lush chorused modulation. Ambience. Combines time-varying randomized early reflections with a full-featured reverb tail, with the balance between early and late reverb controlled by the attack knob. Useful for adding air to drums, vocals, and any place where a reverb should be felt but not heard. Sanctuary. Inspired by a classic German digital reverberator from the 1970s. Discrete early reflections, a dense late reverb that rapidly builds in echo density, lush detuned modulation. Sanctuary incorporates the bit reduction and floating point gain control used in the AD and DA converters of the early digital hardware. Dirty Hall. A fresh look at the Concert Hall algorithm, with the goal being to emulate the strange fixed point and converter artifacts of early 1980s reverb hardware. Lusher and denser than the Concert Hall algorithm, with loads of warmth and grit on tap, for a roughly hewn beauty. Plug in your analog synth and send yourself into retro sci-fi heaven. Dirty Plate. All the warm and gritty artifacts of Dirty Hall apply to an old-school digital plate algorithm. High echo density, wide stereo image, and just the right amount of metallic sheen. Drums come alive when sent through dirty plate. Smooth plate. The complete opposite of dirty plate. Smooth decay at all settings, from short to near eternal. Lush chorusing, with none of the metal found in dirty plate. The most transparent and naturalistic reverb in Valhalla Vintage Verb. Crank up the size parameter, and float off into space. Smooth room. A smooth and transparent room reverb, in the smooth plate style. Useful for emulating the room/hall algorithms of late 1980s hardware, as well as getting clear reverberation with low amounts of coloration. Smooth random. A random room/hall algorithm, with transparent decays that can be adjusted from tiny to huge. Randomized delay modulation, similar to random space, but with a much tighter initial attack and smoother decay. A good jack-of-all-trades reverb algorithm. Nonlin. Gated, reverse, and nonlinear reverbs are all on tap here. Use size to control the duration of the reverb, and attack to smoothly interpolate between a truncated reverb, a flat-gated decay, and huge reverse reverbs. Lush chorusing modulation on tap, for your shoegazing needs. Chaotic hall. A chaotic take on the concert hall algorithm, with modulation and saturation artifacts inspired by classic tape echoes. Lush and warm, with subtle wah and flutter chorusing that adds depth without making your reverb seasick. Chaotic chamber. Smooth and chaotic at the same time. A relatively dimensionless reverb algorithm that adds depth to your sound. Wah and flutter modulation, subtle tape saturation. Use this algorithm on pretty much any input, and it will sound good. Chaotic neutral. Combines chaotic modulation with a fairly colorless algorithm architecture, for a reverb that sounds like the input, just with reverb. That should give you a good idea of what the controls do on Vintage Verb, and also what the 18 reverbs that are included are. We hope you have found this tutorial useful. Refer back to as you need since there are a lot of details here. Be sure to subscribe and rate this video. If you need any preset expansions for any of the Valhalla reverbs and effects, we have thousands of them available on our site in the link below. Thank you for watching and make some great recordings.